Welcome to the last virtual public program of the school year here at the Massachusetts Historical Society. My name is Catherine Allgore, and I'm the president of the MHS. And I really feel it's a kind of landmark moment. We started the public programs virtually in early March, and we have had such amazing attendance, hundreds of people for programs from all across the country and all across the world. I think the farthest we've had are participants from Japan and India. So let me start this evening's program by thanking you all for making this so successful. Thank you for attending. Thank you for participating with your great questions and answers. Thank you for tolerating some technical mishaps that can happen from time to time. And also those of you who have given money to support our efforts or become a member, thank you very much. And I know there are long-term supporters out there, and I'm thanking you as well for always making it possible for us to do what we do. And I hope you're enjoying all the new company. We also hope that you stay with us. So after our vacation in August, we're going to be back, may I say, with a bang. On September 9th, we're having our Speakers Fund series program. It is a discussion about Watergate between John Dean and William Weld. And it will be moderated by Ted Widmer, whose book on Abraham Lincoln, Lincoln on the Verge, you've been hearing all about. And we have other programs coming in the fall, including one on the Boston Red Sox and World War II, and the last Brahmin, Henry Cabot Lodge. Now, if you miss us in August, please go on our website. It's masthis.org. And there you'll find things like the object of the month, which is a close examination of some interesting piece of art or artifacts in our collections. Our blog, which is a written meditation on a historical event or collection or person. You can find our calendar there, so you can start signing up for public programs. And you can find the public programs themselves in videos. So if there's something you missed or something you'd want to relive, you can while away the time doing that. And please also, as I always say, there's that other little button there that says support. So if you click on that, find a way to join the family. Now, before I turn over the program to our Director of Public Programs, Exhibitions, and Community Engagement, Gavin Cleespies, I just want to take a moment and thank Gavin and to thank Sarah Bertulli, who's our Public Programs Coordinator. We asked them to turn on a dime and take our programs virtual, and they did it. And I think we can all agree they did it superbly and beautifully and well, and have really set us up for the future. So thank you, Gavin. Thank you, Sarah. And Gavin, take it away.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for the warm welcome and the wonderful thank you. We really appreciate it. It has certainly been an experience learning about doing things digitally, but I think with a couple hiccups here and there, we're making our progress through it, and I think it will be with us probably from now on, even when we are back in the building after COVID-19 has passed. So thank you all for joining us. As Catherine mentioned, I'm Gavin Cleespies, the Director of Programs, Exhibitions, and Community Partnerships, and I hope everyone is staying cool despite the very warm weather these past couple of days. Today's program is hosted collaboratively between MHS and the Salem Historical Society. If you're thinking to yourself, I've been to Salem many times, but I don't remember visiting the Historical Society, that's because the Salem Historical Society is not a bricks and mortar museum. It's not a collecting institution. Rather, it works to develop and share Salem's history through sponsored events and lectures and the virtual publication of articles, features, and essays related to Salem's rich history. The Historical Society is a collaborative organization that partners with other community institutions to research and share the amazing history of the city of Salem. This program is an example of collaboration. Today we will hear about a selection of archival material and artifacts that help document Salem's history, but are actually held in Boston at the Massachusetts Historical Society. Our guide today will be Peter Drummey, the Stephen T. Riley Librarian at MHS. Peter has worked for MHS for over 40 years and has an encyclopedic knowledge of the massive archival collections at MHS. He will certainly be a great guide for the material related to Salem. Peter, if you'd like to turn on your camera and you can take us away.
The original plan was to invite members of the Salem Historical Society to the Massachusetts Historical Society to see artifacts and documents on display, and we would be meeting otherwise, other than the present chaos in the world, we would be meeting in the room which is the virtual background for where I'm speaking to you from, the seminar room of the Historical Society. But rather than look at me for the next 30 or 40 minutes, I thought I'd just sort of take you through some images of materials from our collections and some information about how to get in contact with us if you have more interest. This is what I'm going to speak about this evening, the materials for the study of Salem in our collections, the collections of the Massachusetts Historical Society. And if we go to the next slide, what I'm going to start out with is just telling you about the Massachusetts Historical Society. We're 229 years old this year, and I'm not going to take a lot of time doing this, but what I thought I'd do is just start by reading to you from our birth announcement. This is a circular letter that appeared in Boston in 1791, and it reads, I'm just going to read the first paragraph. Sir, and the assumption was the 10 founders of the Historical Society, the Massachusetts Historical Society, were all men, and I think they assumed that the people who would join would be men as well. So they wrote, Sir, a society has lately been instituted in this town called the Historical Society. The professed design of which is to collect, preserve, and communicate materials for a complete history of this country and accounts of all valuable efforts of human ingenuity and industry from the beginning of its settlement. In pursuance of this plan, they have already amassed a large quantity of books, pamphlets, and manuscripts, and are still in search of more. And we are still in search of more. A catalog of which will be printed for the information of the public. So, right in the founding statement of the Massachusetts Historical Society, I'm really showing you this as way of an apology, having been here at the MHS a very long time, and with a fairly long name, I've fallen into the bad habit of just referring to the MHS as the Historical Society. And I'm sure, speaking to members of another historical society, that I'll fall into doing that this evening as well. But I will point out that at the time of our founding, we were simply the Historical Society. There were no others in the Western world. So until the Massachusetts Historical Society was incorporated in 1794, our name was simply the Historical Society. And it is the case that we've kept faith with this principles laid out in this first document to collect, preserve, and they said communicate, because they saw themselves as primarily a publication society. They were going to transcribe and publish documents and circulate them so that we would say make available or make accessible today. But at the core of what we do, and we have a whole range of programs, but the core of the Massachusetts Historical Society is this material that's been collected over this enormous expanse of time. It's also the case that the MHS, as it said in its founding document, was not focused on collecting materials for the history of Massachusetts, colony of Massachusetts Bay, but for the new nation. We're founded only 8 years after the treaty that ends the American Revolution, and documenting the history of the new nation. The collection focuses on Massachusetts, and with other localities being strong for their own histories. The neighborhood of Boston is most heavily represented in our collections. But back at the beginning, this was an attempt to document the history of the United States. And next, This is, and it's hard to see here, and we'll go on to a published version of this in a moment. This is the beginnings of our connections, at least as published, going back to 1799, when the Reverend William Bentley of Salem, an early member of the Massachusetts Historical Society, wrote out a description, a topographical description in History of Salem. And if we go to the next slide, this is a sort of dogged copy from 1799 of how this is published. And Bentley starts right with this topographical description, giving you the longitude and latitude of Salem, going on to give a very detailed geographical statement about the setting of Salem on the coast, then gives what's really quite wonderful. It's essentially, if you walked through Salem in 1799, what would you see? And when did buildings date from? And giving you a real sense of place. Then he goes on to give a concise, but this is 75 pages long, a concise history of more than 100 years of Salem history. He covers all the things that you might expect about the founding and John Endicott, the early relations with Native Americans, the controversies of the Puritan century. He doesn't back away from describing the witchcraft hysteria right there in an early document about Salem history. But he goes out of his way to point out, as many people have since, that this took place largely in Salem Village, that is, in Danvers, as he puts it, to sort of get this story right from the beginning. I don't think that really helped too much, but it's interesting that he thought it was important to make that clear in this very early publication. And if we go on to the next slide, the Historical Society it's important in thinking about what we hold about Salem is that we haven't collected systematically materials for Salem history because of the strong collection of materials locally, or really systematically for Essex County. There is so much local pride, local patriotism throughout Massachusetts, in the 350 odd cities and towns in Massachusetts at the time of the founding of the Massachusetts Historical Society and the District of Maine as well, that there was an attempt to accumulate those materials. There being, even back in the 18th century, not a strong sense of county government and institutions. There was less focus on what happened in the counties, although there were early county histories and collection of official documents in the county level. But most local historical material has been held locally over the course of Massachusetts history. That's not to say that there aren't important collections outside of the towns and counties themselves. The Massachusetts Historical Society collecting statewide, and from the time of its founding in the 1840s, the New England Historic Genealogical Society here in Boston collecting published town histories systematically and information about town histories, because early town histories are so important for studying family history. So nevertheless, there are wonderful documents throughout our collection. This is a very poor slide of a chart printed in Salem in the 1820s of the ports associated with the pepper trade out of Salem by a ship captain, Samuel Lambert, but then engraved and published in Salem. Part of this story. And while the institutions in Salem and in Essex County are immensely strong for this history of this overseas trade, the East India trade out of Salem and other ports, nevertheless, no collection is complete in any one specific place. And here in the at the Massachusetts Historical Society and trying to document a sort of national history with local information. The Massachusetts Historical Society has collected not only materials about here in Massachusetts and the history of Massachusetts and the history of the new United States, especially the 13 colonies that became the United States, but also materials about everywhere that people from here went to out in the world. So we're very strong for the history of the India and the India trade and the China trade out of Boston, communication with the East Indies from Boston and other Massachusetts ports. But that's all here to support what is essentially important of what we hold is collections of personal papers. The papers of families and individuals. So the core of our collection is letters and diaries. I'm not going to show you slides of a lot of them because they're hard going on a screen, but nevertheless, in thinking about what we hold, think of personal papers and then all of the materials, maps and newspapers, photographs from the introduction of photography, artifacts, all this assemblage of historical materials, but here to support research and collections of papers. So we have documents to do with these voyages to the East Indies, and along with them are published reports and maps and other information. And if we go to the next slide, one of the people I think who's very important in both the history of Salem, but also the history of Massachusetts and the nation is Joseph Story. And he represents what happened in the urban centers of all of the United States, but I think particularly here in Massachusetts, where people from the towns and the countryside, the energetic, active young people immigrated. This is an internal immigration to urban centers, cultural centers, the place of business and industry. And Joseph Story is a good example of that. Not born in Salem, but he spends most of his early life, really into middle age, in Salem. This painting, which hangs in the reading room of the Massachusetts Historical Society, a favorite of mine from our collection. I don't want to be too romantic, but I think it reveals something about this very interesting man, the youngest person ever appointed to the Supreme Court, although that's a kind of story in itself. John Quincy Adams, who was then the minister at the Court of the Czars in St. Petersburg, representing the United States, was appointed, without being informed of it, appointed to the Supreme Court by President Madison, and he replied with all this long time, the communication back and forth, thank you very much, but he had an important diplomatic post and decided to stay with it. So the appointment of Joseph Story, I think he was the fourth person actually who was put before the Senate for advice and consent in his appointment to the Supreme Court. But he has an extraordinarily important career as a justice, as a law professor and dean of the Harvard Law School. But his association and the formation of him as a person in Salem is really important. So we don't hold the bulk of his legal papers. There's a very strong collection at the Harvard Law School. There is important material in Salem, but at the same time, there are a series of collections, small collections of his papers, especially personal correspondence, which reveal a lot about his development as a person and as a lawyer and as a professor of law. It's also the case that someone like Joseph Story is very active in a whole range of institutions. He's the person who gives the address at the bicentennial of the founding of Salem in 1828, about the time of this portrait. And he also is a member of the Massachusetts Historical Society over the course of much of his adult life. So he's interested in history, he writes about history, but in thinking about what you would find about him here at the Massachusetts Historical Society, again, it goes back to personal papers. Correspondence, not only in collections of his own correspondence, but also the range of documents written by him, his correspondence with other individuals that falls in other collections of personal papers. So in coming and doing research at the Historical Society, our catalog will lead you to collections of documents, but in addition to that, there are many documents that are scattered through what are now more than 3,500 separate collections here at the MHS. And if we go on to the next slide, here's representatives of an extraordinarily interesting Salem family, familiar to, I think, to many people from Salem, and that is the papers of John. They're not so much papers, but materials, not so much about the life of John and Nancy Lennox Ramon, the parents of 8 children, but the lives of their children, especially their eldest son, Charles Lennox Ramon, who is extraordinarily important in the history of the abolitionist movement as a Black abolitionist here in Massachusetts, and really nationally and internationally active as an abolitionist. Closely allied with William Lloyd Garrison. This, in fact, is a copy of a photograph of Ramon, which is part of a collection that was assembled by William Lloyd Garrison's sons, who were preparing, and this is an artifact from the 19th century, an extra illustrated edition of the 4-volume set of their father's life and letters. And what they would do is this 4-volume set of William Lloyd Garrison's published letters and biography were disbound, and then hundreds of additional images and even manuscript documents were inserted in these 4 volumes, making them, I believe, 8 volumes now. But it's a wonderful it's a wonderful documentation of the father's life, but it becomes a sort of artifact in its own right. This elegantly bound multi-volume set of the father's life work, but also with representative individuals in documents by them, but especially images of them inserted throughout. Now, the very energetic sons collected hundreds of more images than they could logically insert in this set. So in addition to this published extra illustrated life and letters of William Lloyd Garrison, we have this wonderful set of images of hundreds of people active in the abolitionist movement, notable figures like Charles Lennox Ramon, but also a strikingly large number of relatively plain people there as well. So these images have all been digitized and can be systematically searched. And so it's a collection assembled for a specific purpose that's taken on a much larger life than I think what the creators thought. Another figure represented in Garrison's papers and related collections here at the MHS, and we go to the next slide, is this very remarkable woman. This is Sarah Parker Ramon, one of Charles's younger sisters, and this is an extraordinary family. But here's a person, again, who acted as a speaker for the abolitionist cause in the years before the American Civil War, although she was still a very young woman. And then, like many people active, especially Black abolitionists, found that the promise of abolition did not live up to what their expectations were. And Sarah Parker Ramon had spent years lecturing first in England, Scotland, and Ireland, and then throughout Europe. She always felt that her education, she had been deprived of the education she wanted here in America. It's one of the things was that because the Salem schools were still segregated, the Ramon family took their children, the younger children, to Newport, where they could participate in, gain access to schools there. But even with that additional training, education here in America, Sarah Ramon continued her education in Europe, and in the 1870s attended medical school in Florence and spent the remainder of her life on through the rest of the 19th century in Europe as a physician in Italy, dying in London, and she's buried in Rome. So here's a person who has her family is from Boston and Salem. Her life begins in Salem, and her career takes her a long way away from these local places. But it's the story of the promise of abolition for a young woman before the Civil War, disappointment in the outcome of the Civil War and Reconstruction, and someone who made a new life in a place that was, in some respects, more hospitable to a person of color. But again, this is not to say that there is a large collection of papers here for any member of the Ramon family, but they're so remarkable, including the sisters who act as caterers and hotel keepers and restaurateurs in Salem, brothers and sisters of Sarah and Charles, remain here and are active here, but this family becomes far-flung over the course of the 19th century. It's also the case that, again, no single institution holds everything that's useful for the study of an individual or family or even a place. There is a very interesting and important collection of letters and documents written by abolitionists at the Boston Public Library. And I would, under other circumstances, say, well, there's this wonderful collection down the street from the Massachusetts Historical Society for this topic. But like many institutions, including the Massachusetts Historical Society, we're temporarily closed to the public. We'll see how soon it will be possible to open again. But many institutions have started much more actively, even without regard to the COVID-19 epidemic, have started to digitize and make available at their websites systematically materials for historical research. So these abolitionist letters at the Boston Public Library are now both digitized, but because 19th century handwriting can sometimes be hard going, there also have been systematically transcribed through a crowdsource project. And that's a wonderful, recently available source that's available to you even under the present circumstances and even at a distance. And if we go to the next slide, Another a true son of Salem, although much of his life was spent elsewhere, is Louis Emilio, the son of Italian immigrants. Emilio is so young when the Civil War begins that in order to enlist, he has to have his parents testify that he's 18 years old, the age of enlistment in the Civil War. In fact, he's 16. So he serves in the 23rd Massachusetts Infantry for most of 2 years. He has a career as an able young soldier, is promoted to the rank of non-commissioned officer. And then when the 54th Massachusetts Infantry is formed in 1863, and one of his enterprises as a abolitionist, Charles Lennox Ramon, is one of the recruiters of soldiers for the 54th Regiment through the Civil War. But because the Federal Army during the Civil War won't accept black officers, the officers of the 54th Regiment are white, and they are both sprigs off of white abolitionist families here in Massachusetts, most notably Robert Gould Shaw, but also capable young officers or enlisted men who have sort of proved them in the Civil War, who are promoted to be officers or promoted in rank in the 54th Regiment. So Emilio is commissioned a lieutenant in the 54th Regiment. He's still not 18 when he's commissioned in the 54th Regiment because he was 16 when he originally enlisted. So his parents again have to write him out a sort of testimony that he's of the proper age to enlist. In fact, he doesn't turn 18 until he's actually served, until just before he joins the 54th Regiment, and he's quickly promoted to the rank of captain, company commander. He's so young, I don't think it's this photograph of him, but he sends a photograph home to his parents in his officer's uniform, and his mother writes back to him and says, "What's that caterpillar on your face, that furry thing on your face?" Because she's startled to find that her very young son can grow a mustache. But Emilio has a heroic role in the Civil War. He, as a company commander, and the attack on Fort Wagner in July of 1863, where the 54th Regiment gains fame and glory. The next morning, Emilio is in fact the senior officer still present that hasn't been killed or wounded or isn't missing of the survivors of the attack on Fort Wagner fortification just at the edge of Charleston Harbor in South Carolina. So Emilio continues on to serve on through the war. At the end of 3 years service, because he had enlisted back at the beginning of the war, he leaves the regiment. And what's very endearing is that he's made connections with these men who have served with him, that he commanded in the 54th Regiment. And he stays in touch with them, and he gathers materials about them. He has a life as a real estate developer in San Francisco and New York after the Civil War. He doesn't come back to Massachusetts or Salem except to visit. Nevertheless, he has been asked to help in the assembly of information for a history of the Massachusetts regiment that he served in before he joined the 54th, and he takes a part in that. And then he goes on to the great enterprise of his life, which is systematically gathering materials for a history of the 54th Regiment, which is published in 1891 as A Brave Black Regiment, and then a second revised edition with additional information that he gathered on from the circulation of the first edition of his history comes out in 1894. So Emilio, as much as anyone, is responsible for what we know about the 54th Regiment, the life lived by soldiers, information about the very plain men who served as the enlisted men in the regiment, although there were some notable figures, Frederick Douglass's sons and other notable figures in the regiment, focusing on the company he commanded. He also collects photographs of both officers and individual soldiers, black soldiers who serve in the regiment, but this is an extraordinary enterprise, and Emilio, being so young, lives on into the 20th century, dies in 1918, and his sister donates the research materials that he had collected for this history to the Massachusetts Historical Society. So there's material here about him and about his family, but what's really important is the information he gathered, the research materials he assembled for his history of the 54th Regiment. So he's not a local historian, but he is a historian who focuses on a relatively narrow but important field of study, and it's been wonderfully useful for the people who have followed doing research in that field. And next, oh, and this is, again, very hard to see, but this is, I wanted to make sure that I covered some things from the more recent past. And this is a wonderful letter. This is in the J. Foster Smith papers that are part of a very large collection of the papers, family papers assembled by a grandson, Philip Chadwick Smith. But J. Foster Smith, born during the Civil War, as a teenager, started working as a cotton boy for the Numkeg Steam Power Company and worked there for 57 years, rising up to be the corporation clerk and then a director of the mill, and essentially lives his life in Salem and describes the life of increasingly industrialized Salem over the course of the last decades of the 19th century and the first decades of the 20th century. And because the mill was destroyed in the Great Fire in 1914, rebuilt and remained in business till the 1950s, J. Foster Smith had witnessed this, had connections going back to the founding of the mill in the 1840s, but connections, he remained active in the work of the mill and the enterprise of running it on into the 1930s. Here's a copy of a letter retained in his own papers that he wrote to Alphonse Bakarowski about the arrival of Polish immigrant workers in Salem from 1890 on, as he describes it. He tells how at first Polish workers came from other mill towns in Massachusetts and elsewhere to Salem, and then over time people started immigrating directly to Salem from Poland, so that towards the end of his life, about half of the 1,600 workers in the mill complex were Polish immigrants or the descendants of Polish immigrants. But being queried about the Polish community, the history of the Polish community in Salem, Foster Smith, as he often is identified, apologizes that because the mill records had been destroyed in 1914 and 1930, when he's writing this, he says, this is based upon my recollections, and I apologize for any inaccuracy in it. And he gives this wonderful account of how Polish was so exotic back when Polish workers first started being employed, that they'd appear in the records of the mill as he gives an example of Veronica Rye Whiskey, because no one could figure out how to spell or pronounce her Polish name. But in a way, he's way too diffident, because his papers, and including an immense diary he keeps over the course of this very long life, have lots of information about the mill enterprise in them, including information about the mill workers. Having started life as a mill worker, he became a member of the management of the corporation. Nevertheless, he remained attuned to the workforce, acted as a sort of intermediary between the owners and managers and the workers. And his papers, which are both wonderful personal and family papers, his diaries are in fact a very good documentary history of an establishment which lost, through the catastrophic fire in Salem, a lot of its information and history. And we go to the next slide. Oh, I'm just going to tell you just a little bit about searching for the, both through our catalog and how to get in touch with us, especially under present circumstances. And all I've done here is our online catalog, which you can find through the Massachusetts Historical Society website, is named Abigail, which supposedly stands for Automatic Bibliographic something or another, but in fact is named for Abigail Adams. But I've just called up a search of Salem Diaries, and this is the first hits that come up in the list of diaries that are both descriptions of diaries in our manuscript collection, and also ones that have references in the descriptions, the bibliographic descriptions, to Salem. And you'll see here, I'm not wearing my reading glasses, but the diaries of J. Foster Smith and his wife come up as being one of the sources. There are other diaries kept in Salem that go back to the 18th century. Sometimes under diaries, things other than diaries appear. Records kept systematically, chronologically appear as well, so that we have diaries going back to do with Salem events, certainly going back to the 17th century. But I think you might be surprised that we have diaries kept on into the 20th century, and including some recently acquired collections of family papers that have diaries kept in Salem at some point along the course of people's lives. But how you could search from a distance, not about all the millions of individual documents in our collections, but search for a sort of sense of what we might hold across a broader topic. And next, one thing I'm very happy, it's almost an announcement. This is only just begun work. Well, you can get in touch with our reference staff through email, over the telephone, and I'll have a slide that gives that information at the end. We've started to help people directly, give people the sort of assistance that you would get in person at a time when you can't be at the Massachusetts Historical Society in person. We've set up a system of live chat with members of the reference staff, And this is 5 days a week. The Historical Society, the Massachusetts Historical Society, under normal circumstances, open 6 days a week. But this live chat is running 10 to 4, 4 days a week, and we're traditionally open late on Tuesdays. So even though we're not actually open, we're keeping this live chat open until 7 o'clock in the evening on Tuesdays. And I think this can be a very productive way to get the sort of lay of the land for a project or a topic you're interested in. And if you go to the next slide, you'll be shocked that I put a image of someone from Marblehead all the way across the bay here. But I do want to call your attention that we're still doing a range of activities, these Zoom presentations that we would otherwise do in person, programs, and but we have coming up just after Labor Day our first virtual exhibition, which is on political cartoons leading. This is an exhibition that will run leading up to the election. Because it's virtual, it's online, it's a permanent exhibition, but it builds out from one of the most famous, if North Shore, the gift of not so much Salem, but I think fairly the North Shore of Massachusetts to the political lexicon. And if we go to the next slide, this is, well, our copy of not the gerrymander cartoon as it was originally printed in a Boston newspaper, but separately printed in 1812 as a political cartoon and then a satirical remarks about it. This is the towns of a state senate district on the North Shore assembled into this salamander-like a creature. This is named for Elbridge Gerry, although it's become gerrymander. The Gerry family insists that this should be the gerrymander, but I don't think we're going to have much success in persuading people about that. I put it up here, one, to tell you that these other programs at the Historical Society continue, but also I want to make it clear that there's still work to be done, because I won't try to go back to it. But if you think about this, while Governor Gerry signed the bill that allowed for this manipulation of voting districts, the creation of the gerrymander, he was elected statewide, and he was defeated for re-election in 1812. So the gerrymander did him no personal good in terms of his political career. He was accepted that as solace. He was a Jeffersonian Republican, and he was made the vice presidential candidate in 1812 as for his work on behalf of the party. But it is the case that this is where local politics have this national and international influence. What the people in 1812 were truly shocked by was how this district was manipulated. But down at the tail of the gerrymander, how it crossed a county line, that is Chelsea, the old town of Chelsea, much larger than present-day Chelsea, that extended all the way, of course, all the way down to Boston Harbor, was included in this Essex County voting district. It's also the case that people have, before his illustrious career on the Supreme Court, Joseph Story was an active agent of the Republican Party, the proto-democratic party here in Massachusetts. And some people, rather than Elbridge Gerry, who the gerrymander is named for, think that this is the work of Joseph Story as a campaigner at the local level, in which case I would say that instead of calling the gerrymander, we should probably call it the Salemander, which is probably would make a little bit more sense to people. But it's perfectly possible that this had Salem roots if we can find something in, I don't think in Story's own papers, but find some sort of evidence of his role in this. And I think last, I just want to end here, and I haven't left much time for questions, but I'm perfectly happy to field them, is how to get in touch with me, my email address and direct telephone number, but also in addition to the live chat and the ability to set up a Zoom conference with a reference librarian at the Historical Society, you can either email the library reader services staff here or call them. And this is, you don't have to take this down. All you have to do is get in touch with you and we'll make those connections or provide you with that information. But here ends my sermon. I do think that I do want to just point out one more thing, that it is always seems to me to be odd, being very much a child of South Shore, Massachusetts. North Shore, Massachusetts is, in fact, always seemed to me to be slightly foreign territory. But at the same time, I think that while if your interest is in Salem, there's plenty to see here. And it's also in thinking about what we hold about Salem, the range of things we have, and over the course of time that it covers, that's a really useful way to think about what we might hold on another topic or person of interest to you. So Gavin, how are you going to do the questioning or field them? Or
So Jerry asked, does the MHS have anything relating to Salem's Revolutionary era history? In particular, Captain Derby's sailing the Quero to London carrying the colonist account of Lexington and Concord.
Oh yes, that's actually a really good point, is that, and that probably is important in thinking about. I won't try off the top of my head without making it up to tell you the specific documents we have, but in thinking about the MHS and its founding right after the Revolution, this is exactly what they set out to do. The founders of the Historical Society, more than anything else, were concerned that the history of the Revolution would be lost as the revolutionary generation died away. It's not the first document that they collected or published, but the sort of epitome of this is Paul Revere's account of his ride to Lexington. He didn't actually make it to Concord, but he wrote for the Historical Society both an account of his ride, an account of the events leading up to the outbreak of fighting in 1775. The Reverend Jeremy Belknap, a minister then in Dover, New Hampshire, a Bostonian who was preaching in Dover, New Hampshire, and later moved back to Boston, actually came to Boston, outside of Boston, to the revolutionary lines outside of Boston during the siege of Boston to gather information about the siege. So people were collecting information contemporaneously about these events. So that, again, is an area of great, the era of the Revolution is an area of great strength in our collections.
Thank you. So Megan wrote, thank you for this fabulous program. I understood that Charlotte Fortin, formerly Grimke, moved to Salem as a teenager in the 1850s to attend public schools because they were integrated then. Do you know whether Sarah Redmond was of an earlier generation? Perhaps the Salem school was integrated in her day, but I know that the Redmonds and Fortins were friends. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Sarah Parker Redmond is born in 1824, so they're, and Charles is born in 1810, is older, but there is, my understanding is the the Ramon's move for several years to Newport has to do with the difficulty in enrolling in other than a colored school, as they were referred to in Salem in this period. This desegregation of Boston schools, Boston schools took place in the 1850s, and it's not until then that you have the systematic capacity of Black children to go to school with white children, although that is very much something that's determined on the local level. It's also the case, and this isn't a burden upon Salem, but this is a complicated period. Both Charles Ramon and later Frederick Douglass both essentially got into physical struggles about the so-called Jim Crow cars, the segregation of the early railroads in this very same period, traveling back and forth. That was in fact settled by the actions of the Massachusetts legislature in the 1840s. So this is a time when these things are changing. So I knew of Charlotte Fortin's presence in Salem, and there is a connection with the Ramon family, that she has connections with them. But that idea of going to Salem to find a more enlightened place may or may not be true at any specific time.
Thank you. Emily wrote, does MHS have documents related to the Pickering family of Salem?
Yes, I skipped over that because it's almost such a gigantic story that while there's important material about Timothy Pickering, the Secretary of State in the early Republic, who has a long, interesting public career, there's important materials in Salem and at the Library of Congress and National Archives, as an early figure in the national government. The Massachusetts Historical Society has an immense collection of Timothy Pickering's papers. And when you describe personal papers, of course, you're talking about really, in almost every instance, in large collections, talking about family papers because they're both ancestors and descendants contained within. But yes, it's a very, very large and very important collection of Timothy Pickering papers and Pickering family papers at the Massachusetts Historical Society. And there's a good online guide to them. They haven't been systematically digitized. They're available on microfilm. That's where you can get a sense of what's in the collection from our website by a finding aid, as guides to manuscript collections are called there, but also find out if there is a place where these materials are available. It's a striking collection in terms of Pickering also lived a long life, so he later on in his life badgered both John Adams and Thomas Jefferson about what had happened back in the founding time of 1775 and 1776. Not that he wasn't active himself at that time, but as one of the in their long correspondence with each other, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson commiserated with all these sort of queries from Timothy Pickering about how the Declaration of Independence was written or who played what role in the early Republic.
So we probably just have time for one or two more questions, but I wonder if you wanted to tell everyone a little bit about the Witches Cabinet or the Witches Bureau in the hallway.
Yeah, there's where I say that the Massachusetts Historical Society is not a museum because many state and local historical societies primarily are museums, but we have collected a body of artifacts, often the small things that come along with collections of personal papers, the watch or eyeglasses or ring or pocketbook, later on photographs that have come with collections of papers, but there are some larger things in our collection, hundreds of paintings, for the most part, portraits of people whose papers are here or are described in papers that we hold, but large, and including some large format paintings, but also a small number of pieces of furniture and large artifacts. And one of them is clearly an early a chest of drawers. And this is where interpreting what's recorded in records becomes complicated, because there is a tradition that this chest of drawers was either, the way I prefer is that the spirit of a demon appeared out of the drawers. Other people have argued, as happened during the witchcraft hysteria, that in fact someone was able to leap over this chest of drawers, and that was considered more than what was humanly possible. So whether someone leaped over or leaped out of the drawers, we're the proud owner of an important piece of 17th century early North Shore furniture, but something that has come down in a family with this kind of wonderfully awful or awfully wonderful story to go along with it, and occupies a place of pride in the entryway to our reading room. So when you're able to visit us, take a moment to gaze upon it and try to figure out what you think actually happened or didn't happen.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm sorry that we didn't get to everyone's questions.
If I could, Gavin, I know people have specific narrow questions or general questions. Please feel free to get in touch with us, either me directly or with our library reference staff. If went across over a lot of material in a short period of time and only touched the surface, only gave examples of representative things. But this is a conversation that can continue after this program, certainly.
I want to thank everyone for coming. I also hope that people will check out the Salem Historical Society. And of course, if you've enjoyed this program, we're happy to provide these programs for free, but we are also always pleased if people support our efforts through making a donation or becoming a member.